So you're thinking about moving to Grosse Pointe, Michigan, or maybe you're thinking about moving to Michigan and you're wondering if Grosse Pointe could be for you. Well, in this video, we want to give you a brief overview of Grosse Pointe, the general area, a little bit about it, so you can understand if that might be a good city for you. Hello, welcome. This is the Living in Detroit channel, and today we are talking about Grosse Pointe, Michigan. My name is Matt Talbot. I will be your host today, and I'm excited to review a little bit about Grosse Pointe today. We want to dive into a little bit of the housing statistics, talk about the school system, what Grosse Pointe is like, to kind of paint the picture of what Grosse Pointe is, so you can see if that might be a good city for you to move to. On this channel, we talk a lot about Detroit, Metro Detroit, Southeast Michigan, and Michigan as a whole, and we talk specifically about moving to the area or living in the area. So if that's you, then this channel is for you. So Grosse Pointe, Michigan. First and foremost, where is Grosse Pointe? Grosse Pointe is actually east of Detroit. It is really the only area east of the city of Detroit, and then you run into Lake St. Clair or the Detroit River, depending on where you're at in Detroit. And so basically, if you head basically east down the Detroit River or down Jefferson Avenue and head a little bit north up the shoreline, you're going to run into an area called Grosse Pointe. It is about, again, borders Detroit, so depending on what part of Detroit, but it's about 10-15 minutes to downtown Detroit. Again, depending on where you're at in Grosse Pointe, you could be right on the border of the east side of Detroit as well, and again, sits on the water. So Grosse Pointe is an area. There is Grosse Pointe City, but Grosse Pointe is an area of 5 different cities that go up and down the coastline. You have Grosse Pointe Farms, Grosse Pointe Park, Grosse Pointe Shores, Grosse Pointe Woods, and Grosse Pointe itself. That's a tongue twister, okay? So there's really 5 different areas or 5 different locations throughout the area of Grosse Pointe. Grosse Pointe, the city itself, is one of the main areas, of course, but it's a very interesting area. It's one of my favorite areas here in Southeast Michigan because of its uniqueness. So a lot of people choose to live in this area. It's a very, very sought out area. It's an affluent area for a lot of different reasons. And again, it's very unique because it almost sits a little bit on an island, being that east side of Detroit. And because of the different little towns in there, it's a cool setup. As you roll through Grosse Pointe, you continue to kind of drive from town to town. They each have their little downtown areas, different cute shops and restaurants and different things happening in all the different Grosse Pointes as you kind of move through town. The total population of the full area is about 46,000, depending on the statistics that you pull up. The city of Grosse Pointe itself is only like 5,500, but if you look at all the different Grosse Pointes combined, you're at about 46,000 people, and it's about 10.4 square miles, bordering Detroit on the south and west, Lake St. Clair on the east and south, Harper Woods on the west, and some portion St. Clair Shores on the north. So kind of gives you that idea of where it sits on the map. So again, we always go here, Detroit's here, and it's really all the way on the tip of my mitten here as we're looking at Grosse Pointe. So you go through Detroit, and then it kind of sits on the water over that. Because of that, there's fantastic landscape. There's tons of water views, lots of homes and big estates built on the water. A lot of people live that boat life in the Grosse Pointe area without a doubt. Education. So Grosse Pointe schools are always a top-ranked school system. The school system includes 7 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, 2 high schools. You have Grosse Pointe South, ranked number 7th in the state. According to schooldigger.com, ranked 7th in the state. So again, we can't really steer you towards one school or another. However, Grosse Pointe is definitely a very sought-out area. Also, a lot of people thinking about moving to the area, most likely they have family there. They're from the area. Grosse Pointe is one of those places where a lot of people kind of stay. They're from the area. They want to stay in the area. They're a little bit more of an east sider than maybe a west sider of Detroit, and that's their pocket of town. So it's a beautiful area. I love a lot of the architecture in Grosse Pointe. We'll get into housing statistics in a minute, but when you're driving through these little towns, I mean, it's the definition of small town feel, right? There's just really cool old areas. There's old buildings. The real estate, which I'll get into in a minute, tons of old subdivisions that have really kept a lot of their historical integrity through the years. So when you drive through Detroit, there's definitely some pockets in Detroit that have that historical integrity. A lot of Detroit has changed through the years. A lot of homes have been torn down through the years, so there's a lot of vacant land. And although there's a lot of construction, a lot of renovation of a lot of properties, Grosse Pointe really kind of kept that wholeness throughout all the changes over the last 50 years or so here in Detroit and Metro Detroit. So when you pull up to Grosse Pointe, it's almost like a blast from the past. Driving through the different subdivisions, the different areas, the downtown areas, it really does have a very old school charm to it, and a lot of that historical value. The homes are very well kept. They have a lot of historical value, and it's just a vibe. It's just a vibe. That's the only way to really describe it for me. So up next is things to do in the Grosse Pointe area. So we have a list here of, I think, of a couple important pieces of the area. The first is the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House. It's a National Historic Landmark, home of the Ford family since 1928. It's 87 acres of grounds and gardens, open year round. So a city like Grosse Pointe, a city like Detroit is really based on the auto industry, right? And so if you go way back in the early 1900s, the Model T was first coming out, all that good stuff, and Detroit exploded. Grosse Pointe was one of those areas that had a lot of those historical people, including the Ford family having real estate on that side of town. Also, another thing that ties into that history of the auto industry here in Detroit is the Ford Paquette Avenue plant is the birthplace of the Model T. So the Model T, for those who don't know, is the first car in production, major production here in Detroit, and really changed the history of Detroit for a very long time, changed the history of the world, right? But we were manufacturing Model Ts here in Detroit back in the early 1900s, built in 1904 to be exact, and used until 1933, the Paquette plant, a U.S. National Historical Landmark in 2006. It's a really cool museum, and there's a lot of different items like that, a lot of different museums and places like that throughout Southeast Michigan, and definitely in the Grosse Pointe, Detroit area, without a doubt. Up next is Neff Park, contains pool and marina, swim team, synchronized swim team, swim lessons available, tennis lessons, kayak rental, all that good stuff in Neff Park. We have that in one of our videos. We have other videos on Grosse Pointe. We have that in one of our videos kind of showcasing Neff Park. I think it was a cold time of year, so I don't know if it really showcased it that well, but it does show Neff Park, and that's a great example of what you get in Grosse Pointe. So there's a lot of different places to go ahead and launch your boat, a lot of estates with docks and boat rentals and stuff like that throughout the Grosse Pointe area. Neff Park is a great example of that. Again, you're right on the water. That's definitely one of the things to do, is to enjoy the water in Grosse Pointe. I think another thing to do in Grosse Pointe is definitely to head to Detroit. A lot of people want to head downtown. Like I said, you're 10-15 minutes to downtown Detroit. You have all the restaurants, all the good vibes that Detroit has to offer, with a little bit more of a small town suburb. So it is one of the closest. So Grosse Pointe, Ferndale, Redford, there's different areas for sure. You can start heading down river a little bit, but there's different areas. However, Grosse Pointe is one of the closest areas where you get that small town feel, and you're still the closest to Detroit. Like I said, about 15 minutes depending on where you're at. You're also about 35 minutes to Detroit Metropolitan Airport from Grosse Pointe, to give you a little bit more of the lay of the land as well. Okay, last but not least, housing statistics. So we'll try to get some houses to pop up, bing, 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 of some different recent sales in the Grosse Pointe area and all the different Grosse Pointes. I don't think that's how you say it. I don't think you really say Grosse Pointes. You say like Grosse Pointe Woods, Grosse Pointe Park, whatever. You get the idea. So housing statistics. Currently, when you average out the Grosse Pointe area, the average price point is just under $500,000, $496,000. That's the average here in 2024. We're moving towards late 2024, which is crazy to me. But here in 2024, you're averaging just under $500,000. So that's a pretty affluent area, given the size of the homes and stuff like that, because the average price per square foot is over $200 per foot at $214. And days on market is 30 days, meaning on average it takes 30 days for homes to go pending in Grosse Pointe, which is pretty fast overall. That's all homes, so that's all ages, conditions, all that good stuff. Like I said, there's a plethora of different types of real estate. Some that we have noted on my form here: colonial, Cape Cod, ranch, bungalows, Tudors, craftsmans. I mean, there's old Victorian homes, there's huge estates and mansions on the river. And like I said, I think the number one thing you're going to get out of real estate, if you're thinking about a city like Grosse Pointe, is going to be that more historical feel. It's going to be these older homes that are very well kept. The neighborhoods, the subdivisions are all very well kept. So it's like literally like going back in time. There's places in Detroit where it feels like the same thing. But again, because of some of the changes in Detroit through the years, that not street after street after street, it's all, in that type of condition always. When you end up in Grosse Pointe, if you're looking for real estate in the area and you start going through the subdivision, it's pretty cool. Huge trees, a lot of old real estate. There's a variety of different sizes of homes. There's smaller homes in the area that are a little bit more affordable, all the way up to big mansions and everything in between. There is some new construction options in Grosse Pointe as well too. Actually, shout out to my boy Gideon. He's actually building some townhouses in Grosse Pointe. So there's some different new construction options throughout Grosse Pointe. But again, I really think the general vibe is that older historical home if you're thinking about that area. So if that sparks of interest to you, you don't want to be in the city, you want to be in the suburbs, you want to be close to downtown, Grosse Pointe might be the city for you. If Grosse Pointe is for you, let let us know in the comments below. Also, let us know what else we're missing on this channel. What area do you want us to hit here in Southeast Michigan so we can deep dive for you if you're thinking about moving to the area? Like I said, my name is Matt Talbot. My team is Redefine Real Estate. Thank you so much for checking out today's video.